Hello and welcome to More to Explore at Arizona State University. I am Bridget Bavisett with the College of Global Futures. Welcome to this event. The College of Global Futures is one of the newest colleges on the ASU campus. It's the combination of three schools. We have the School for the Future of Innovation and Society, the School of Sustainability, and the School of Complex Adaptive Systems. For undergraduates, there are 5 different majors available within these schools, so it's an amazing opportunity to start moving towards a more sustainable future. I work at the School of Sustainability as well as teach some of our study abroad courses, and we're going to cover today looking at turbulent times. We have the beautiful opportunity to have Sonja Klinsky with us today. Sonja completed her doctoral work at the University of the British Columbia. She's held postdoctoral fellowships at the Center for Climate Change Mitigation at the University of Cambridge and the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions in Vancouver, Canada. I saw Sonja give this presentation about a month ago at a first lecture, and in Zoom, when you have a whole gallery of people, the entire crowd were all nodding our heads, very connected to what she was saying. And so we're so happy that she's with us today. She's one of our most popular professors. And I'd like to go ahead and turn this over now to Professor Sonja Klinsky.
So thanks so much for having me, Bridget. I have to, a little bit of disclaimer, I am a scientist who works a lot on climate change, and because of this, I do a lot of public talking. And when you're working with the public, especially when people are coming from very diverse places, sometimes it can be a little tense in the room. So I was asked if I would give a talk about some of the ways that I have found to communicate when I'm talking to a really wide audience. First, let's talk about thinking about what we see when we think about sustainability or any particular problem. I want to start here. Some of you may already know what this image is. It's a screenshot from the Harry Potter movie. And this is a boggart. Now the boggart is a very special kind of monster. The boggart does not have a natural form. It looks like whatever your deepest fear is. So if you are scared of spiders, it looks like a spider. If you're scared of snakes, it looks like a snake. In this particular case, the gentleman you see is a werewolf and he's most scared of the full moon, so it looks like a full moon. Now you might be asking, why is this woman talking about Harry Potter? Well, I want you to pause for a second and look down into yourself and ask yourself, what are you most scared of when we talk about an unsustainable future or we think about the future? Now, what you might be scared of might be something that's worrying you. It might be the absence of something. So it might be, I'm worried about climate change, or it might be, I'm worried we're not going to solve climate change fast enough. Those are your underlying fears that you're bringing to this conversation. Now, I always like to pause and think about who I'm talking to and what boggart in the room they are looking at any given moment, because it's probably different for every single person on this call or who you're going to talk to about any aspect of sustainability. I learned this in one of my early studies. I decided to ask people what they thought about justice and climate change. And I asked them about climate mitigation, which are things we can do to stop climate change. And I asked them about climate adaptation, which are things we can do to make the impacts of climate change less serious. I'm not going to get into the details here. What I want you to pay attention to the fact is that the gray bars and the black bars are different, right? Which means that every single person, when they were asked about what fairness looks like, had different answers when they were thinking about the boggart of climate change mitigation, how are we going to stop climate change, and the boggart of climate change adaptation, how are we going to respond to climate change? Which means that every single person had different inner fears, even about the same topic, climate change. When they thought about stopping climate change and they were responding to climate change, they were worried about different kinds of things. Which means that when we go into a room and we're talking about any sustainability issue, we absolutely cannot assume that everyone there is worried about the same thing we are, or even has the same concerns about different aspects of the problem we're talking about. So let's think about some of the very common discussions that happen when we're talking about climate change. I'll talk to a community group and someone will say, what we need is an economy-wide carbon tax. And someone will say, no, that's silly. What we need is some engineered seawalls. And someone will say, no, we have to deal with all sorts of inequality. And someone will say, no, this is all a colonial framework. We need to decolonize our ideologies. Now, this is where we end up with very intense political debate. People come into this room and they think they know what the problem is. They think they know how to solve the problem. They think it isn't a problem. Why are we talking about this? You're just going to force big government on us. Those are everybody's different boggarts. But the thing is people haven't realized that it is their boggart. They think it's their absolute truth, the thing they want the most or the thing they're scared of the most. They're all true. All of these aspects of climate change are part of the climate change conversation. The trick is that you have to figure out when you're communicating, what are the boggarts in the room? What are the different fears in the room? And what are the different desires? So I now want to talk a little bit more about how you look in and how you look out to navigate this. So first, I want you to think about who you are. So I love this image. This image is from one of the infinity rooms. There was one of these at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art a little while ago, about 2 years ago, and this is the one from New York. And the thing about an infinity room is they're glass on all sides. So imagine you're looking at yourself, your innermost self, in a room of mirrors. And you have to ask yourself, who am I from all these different perspectives? And what are all the different things I really care about? What am I most scared of in all of these different situations? How do I respond to conflict? How do I respond to someone else having a different idea than me? How do I respond to hostility? How do I respond to someone being really excited and wanting to work with me all of a sudden who I never even met? These are all the kinds of things that happen when we work with others in sustainability. And the best way we can deal with that is to first know ourselves really, really well. And of course, this isn't just your physical self, this is your internal self. So you can think about, who am I from all these different perspectives? That's the single most important thing you can do in this space to help connect with others, is get to know yourself super well. But of course, the trick to getting yourself really well is that just like any single star in the sky, you are a special, fully fledged, amazing human being, but you're only one of you. And every single one of those other stars is also a fully fledged, amazing, incredible human being. And so this is the trick of really thinking about communication. Who am I? And how do I get to know myself, knowing that I have as many reflections as a room of infinity mirrors? And how do I put myself in the sky of all the other people, each of whom also has an infinity room of dimensions? And I think that holding these two things in tension is exactly where we need to be when we're talking about all the really important stuff of life. Who am I, and who is the person I'm speaking with in this space? So that sounds easy, but it's actually a little bit tricky. So I want to now go through some of the very concrete tricks that you can have to help you do this. So finding ways to connect to people, even, especially, if at first you think you disagree. What am I trying to say with this image? This is a network, right? So in this, you're the one with the big happy face, but of course, everybody else is all these other happy faces. And so you're trying to figure out, how am I connected to this person? What do I have in common? What's the link between me and this other person? And of course, you have different dimensions. So does everybody else. Did you grow up in the same place? Do you like to do the same things? Do you have something in common? Are you both parents? Do you both have parents? Do you have a dog? Do you like to drive your car? What is it that has something in common between you and this other person? Now, you're not going to have all things in common. Notice that there's not a single node which is completely connected, but you are connected to all of these different entities. And so one of your first tricks is to try to figure out, what do I share with this person, even though on the surface we look really different, or we seem like we have very different views? And the trick to doing this is curiosity. So one of the things that I think is most amazing with Albert Einstein, I was introduced to Albert Einstein's philosophical writing by my grandfather, who was a physicist and a scientist. And I discovered that he loved Albert Einstein, not because of the science, but because of Einstein's thinking about how to connect with others and what it means to be a curious human being. And there's a fantastic story about this woman I know who leads one of the biggest NGOs in India. It's very difficult work. She finds herself in some incredibly tense, argumentative situations because there's so many things at stake. And she has a test whenever she hires somebody. She asks them, how did you get here today? So someone says, well, I took a train. She says, oh, so how did the person who sat beside you think their day went yesterday? Where were they from? How did the person who sat beside you think about the world? And if they say, well, I don't know, I was so busy preparing for the job interview, I didn't talk to the person beside me. She doesn't hire them. Why? Because for her, the single most important factor in being able to work with other people in difficult spaces is curiosity with others. If you don't have the curiosity to strike up a conversation and find out, what is that other person's world like? How on earth are you going to connect on the really important issues? So let's start first by honoring this idea of curiosity as an absolutely central dimension. Here's another one that I learned from my mother. My mother was a social worker, and she would always say, don't talk to me, talk with me. Took me years to understand what she meant. So let's think about this. On the first diagram, we have a me, and I am talking to you. I am going to talk to you tonight. Now, when you talk to somebody, you have an answer, and you are telling somebody else something, right? Doesn't matter what that person thinks. I'm not interested in finding out how they thought about the world. I'm not interested in what their day is like. I'm not interested in what their boggart is. Now let's think about what happens when you talk with somebody. All of a sudden, the conversation isn't a unidirectional. We are collaborating. We are working together to create this amazing conversation. Now we're talking together. We are talking with each other. That is a completely different place, right? So if I'm talking with you, we need to sit down and have a cup of tea. We need to just let our shoulders relax and say, well, how are you today? We can't be curious when we're talking to somebody. We can be curious when we're talking with somebody. So this is a second major tip. When you find yourself getting all tense about an issue, this is so important, why aren't they listening to me? Just chill. Are you talking with this person or are you talking to this person? Very different conversations, and you're going to open up so many different doors if you can talk with somebody. So remember when we were talking about you and the stars and you're this amazing star? We also have to remember the person you're talking with is this full, amazing human being, right? And so that's where you need to think about them as a whole human who has parents and children and pets, things they love to do, things they hate to do. This is at the heart of really who they are as a person. And it's one of those lessons I've learned so many times where I've gone into a conversation and I thought, oh, this person and I are not going to get along, right? This is just going to be a disaster. There's nothing in common here. And within 5 minutes of a real conversation, we're able to relax and we're able to connect as two human beings, not as a stick person, but as two full human beings. One of the great insights of many different religions actually is in fact that the divine, if you believe in religion, the thing that's a sacred, life itself, is in every single person. Which means that even when you disagree with someone, you have to first respect them as a full human who has this essence of life, this inexplicable glowing. And once you start to say, wow, even if I don't disagree with this person, I'm learning. I'm enjoying my relationship with talking with, key here, gotta talk with, talking with this person. But that can only happen when you remember that is a whole human being who has a whole life history, which you don't know, and you have no idea why and how they might be reacting or what their boggarts are until you're curious enough to talk with them to figure it out. So this image is from Typhoon Haiyan. Typhoon Haiyan was an incredible typhoon which absolutely destroyed part of the Philippines. Now, every typhoon is obviously a tragic moment for the people who, for example, live here in this particular community. This one was particularly powerful because it happened in the middle of a climate negotiation, when some of the countries, including the Philippines, had been arguing for a really long time that we needed to do something about climate change. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the climate negotiations, this incredible typhoon happened. It said, look, this is real. These countries had used every argument in the book. They'd used math, they'd used economics, they had tried to argue their way through, they had tried to show people what was happening, and it kept not being heard. So one of the most amazing things that happened, one of the most amazing things I saw when I was going to climate negotiations regularly was Yeb Sano. Yeb Sano was the chief negotiator for the Philippines. So in a UN climate negotiation, the chief negotiator is the single most important person for their country. His job was to represent the interests of the entire country of the Philippines. That's a fairly big deal. And he was so frustrated that people were not listening to him, that when the typhoon hit, he did the only thing he could think of. He went on a hunger strike for 2 weeks. Now imagine being the only person who's representing your country and voluntarily going on a hunger strike in the middle of a negotiation. Why did he do this? He said, well, in solidarity with my countrymen who are struggling for food and my brother who has not had food for 3 days, I am voluntarily going to fast for the climate. When he did this, the whole space of the room changed. And by the room, I mean 4,000 negotiators. Everyone just stopped. And it allowed us to remember the humanity, the empathy that each human has for another. To remember that we were actually, even though every country had a different perspective, and even though we were there to have a fundamental kind of an argument, which is a negotiation, at the heart of it was a concern for shared humanity and sharing empathy. And that is an incredibly powerful tool. Figure out how to empathize with someone else. Figure out what they're worried about. What are they experiencing? And it changes the dimension of a room. It also shows that you yourself are a little bit human. If you have some emotion, you can say, I'm worried about this. Be honest. I'm scared about this. I am worried about my future. I'm worried about my children's future. I'm worried about whatever it is. It opens up a space for a human-to-human conversation in a way that other forms of data or argumentation does not. Another one, which I love, is just being really creative in how you present something. This is a piece of art by Jill Pelto. Now, you might not have noticed, but this is actually a piece of science, cleverly disguised as a painting. So the dots, notice this jagged dots that look like ice? That's sea level, not sea level. The jagged dots that go down all the way, that's Arctic ice coverage, summer ice coverage over the last 20 years. And it's decreasing. Now think about what this painting does. I could give you a graph with simple what's happening to Arctic sea coverage. You'd be like, oh yeah, the Arctic sea coverage is going down. This asks you to have an emotional response because this decrease of Arctic sea cover ice has an implication, and has an implication for those 2 Arctic foxes right there. They are being scrunched in the corner as their ecosystem starts to disappear. That's again recognizing the shared human experience of emotion with other people and how that allows us to enter into a different conversation. So I want to end with this. This is an image from the Sagrada Familia, which is an amazing cathedral in Spain. Now, when you go into the Sagrada Familia, the light is incredible. It's one of the most beautiful spaces ever. As the light comes through all these, you see these washes on the wall of blue and red and green, and it's like you're walking through a rainbow. And when you walk through the light, you can't tell that it's being made by all of these infinite small pieces. One of the most important things about sustainability is that each of us is incredibly passionate about what we bring to the table. The trick is in remembering that everybody else also has a special role to play. Each one of us is only one of those very particular panes of glass. Now, the Sagrada Familia had only one little tiny, quirky little pane of glass. it would not be able to have the effect that it does. It only works because each one of us brings a tiny little piece to this. I'm telling you this because one of the most important things when trying to work to communicate with others, especially when they don't agree with us, is to figure out how we're going to work together, exactly because we're different. That if we were all the same, we wouldn't get anywhere. If these were all exactly the same pieces, it would be a very boring window. Instead, the whole purpose of communicating with others for sustainability is to figure out how we differ, where we differ, and how we can make those differences work together as opposed to conflict. That also changes how we go into difficult conversations. Because instead of trying to just figure out where exactly we overlap perfectly, we're trying to figure out where we overlap, where do we connect, but where are we different so that we can put different things together. We don't all have to be the same. We have to be different. Because if we're not different, we can't solve this problem because the problem is so complicated. So this, again, changes our frame of reference from one until where we're trying to fight with people to be more like us to one where we're saying, you and I are a little different. Well, that's awesome. Let's figure out how we can work with those two differences. So I'm going to end there.
Thank you so much. Oh, I loved that. Please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. It's just been a joy having you. So thank you again so much. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much, and good luck with this, and have a great rest of the session.
Thank you. We have the College of Global Futures. Sonja is one of our amazing professors. What we do with the program is we teach a transdisciplinary way to look at how to have a more sustainable future, how to work towards innovations for society in the future, and looking at complex adaptive systems. Craziest statistic in the United States is that only 1 in 4 Americans have a job that actually relates to their degree. So we teach in a transdisciplinary way to solve complex problems that are existing in our world today to get towards a more sustainable future. And as students at the College of Global Futures, you're taking real world experience out the door with you with your diploma, internships and capstone projects, and abilities to have a chance to actually start building resume before you get out. This is an example of where our graduates and our alumni currently have jobs. And this is just a handful to show you the variety. I mean, there's government jobs and tech jobs, and there's nonprofits, as well as teaching jobs. There's just a lot of different choices, again, to that sustainability approach that we take. You just have a well-rounded education. As we move forward to look at Arizona State University, we're ranked the 5th in the world out of 766 institutions that are working towards the Sustainable Development Goals. This was set forth by the United Nations. In the United States, we're number 1, and there were only 3 American universities that even reached the top 100. So it's something that we integrate into our classes, our study abroad programs, our internships and capstone projects. In these programs that we teach, there's 5 different bachelor's degrees through the School of Sustainability and the School for the Future of Innovation and Society. And again, to look at those different areas, we're talking about how to design cities where they need energy and transportation and locally grown food. When Professor Klinsky, also Dr. Klinsky, made the point about how we're all separate and yet we're all connected and we all create a greater good because we have our own perspectives. We look at challenges in our cities and we think, how would an engineer fix this? How would a businessman? How would an economist? How would a social worker? How would a scientist look at this problem? When we look at issues like energy, of course we want clean, renewable energies, but it has to be affordable up front. A prime example is solar. Solar energy would be perfect for the state of Arizona, but if it's not affordable from the get-go, a lot of people just can't get it up on their roofs. We look at water issues. It's not just a matter of having clean, abundant water, but it's also just to have been able to make sure that it gets to where it needs to go, that we have a distribution system, that it's always affordable because it is a human right to have water. So we look at challenges in policy and governance of how do you protect the people downstream if the people upstream are either hoarding water or if they're creating a problem with pollution affecting downstream. When we look at food supply, if you think for a moment, and I love how Dr. Klinsky would ask you to just think for a moment about where you live and think about maybe what that area looked like 10 or 20 years ago. Most of us can relate to saying, well, I lived in this city and there was some farmland and there were some orchards nearby, but now it's been developed into a housing development or a new office area. We have been losing farmland to development all over the world. Cities build out, literally pouring concrete on the land that used to grow our food. This is a huge concern because we have a population in our planet that's continuing to grow. We're going to be hitting 9.6 billion by the year 2050. So we're going to have more people with less farmlands. So we need to be looking at those innovations and the ways that we can have our food supply where we're growing more food with less soil and less water. There are ways to do this. And so we're just making sure that it's something that we can get up and running and implemented and in a strong pattern before we hit that carrying capacity of 9.6 billion people on our earth. By the way, some quick perspective, we first hit 3 billion in 1960. In 1999, our human population passed 6 billion. So we more than doubled the number of humans on Earth in just 39 years. We're not growing that quickly anymore, but we are definitely growing. But just showing how if we more than double population again, and we all need water, affordable housing, jobs, medicines, food, this is something where sustainability and innovations for future society are so important. When we look at climate change, we're seeing how COVID-19 is affecting us, as well as climate change exacerbating the problems. There's an incredible More to Explore lecture that will be tomorrow called How COVID-19 Unraveled Our Food System. Part of this was related to climate change and the way that we're growing food and we're very dependent on a distribution center. And suddenly, if that distribution center is shut down even for a small amount of time, we're not able to get the food where it needs to go. Climate change issues are affecting us with policy and governance and how we're able to grow medicines and coffee. I teach a study abroad program, and every year that I've traveled abroad to Cuba, to Costa Rica, we visit coffee plantations that are affected by climate change. So looking at how it's not just environmental, if these regions near the equator where, you know, coffee and cocoa thrive the most on our earth, if those regions are hotter and drier, that affects the economies of those countries. If Jamaica can't grow and sell Blue Mountain coffee and it hits their economy because that's one of their economic drivers, that affects people as well. So it's all connected together. And when we study social transformation, that speaks beautifully to Dr. Klinsky's presentation, because we have to learn how to communicate, to understand the science, to understand why some people may not be on board with the science. What are those connections? Remember, she showed that beautiful graph of the dots, and we are connected. It's just finding those pathways to communicate, to have a transformation of more sustainable choices and behaviors to make a collective difference. And on sustainable development, we have a very international approach. We look locally at what's happening. We look internationally. We learn from other countries. How can we develop our world so that we're able to live more sustainably in the future? So majors at the College of Global Futures include all of these within the School of Sustainability. There's a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, and we have a new degree that just started 2 years ago, a Bachelor of Science specific to sustainable food systems. Our School for the Future of Innovations in Society looks at that Bachelor of Science for Innovation in both the science and the arts. And you can take a screenshot here to just, to get an idea of how these are all connected to each other and maybe what the best fit for you would be. We have amazing advisors with our program in the College of Global Futures. And the important thing is to find the best fit for you, because when you enjoy what you're studying, you get a job that you enjoy. That's like getting paid to play. My colleague, Colin Tatro, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Again, if you're welcome to shoot a screenshot, or you can jot down the phone number here. We give these presentations to high schools and community college and to public institutions and groups. And Colin and I both teach some courses. So we're very comfortable, connecting in with Zoom if that's how you prefer to work. With ASU itself, again, we're top 1% of the world's most prestigious universities. That's with Times Higher Education. We've been getting #1 in innovation now for 6 consecutive years. Both Stanford and MIT held those #1 and 2 positions for quite a long time. And now we've been #1 for 6 consecutive years. Again, these are just great reasons to look at that. Let me just go ahead and end this here again with our connection slide and reach out and connect to us. So thank you for joining us for this More to Explore event, and have a wonderful week. And we hope to see you in some more of the sessions that we have coming up. Have a great day.